Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of True Crime with the Sarge. I'm your host, Joseph Giacalone. If you're watching this live, thank you very much. If you're catching us on the replay, thank you also. I'd like to thank all the mods and everybody else for doing the show here. In the show notes, there is a link to download some of the documents that we're going to talk about today. So the probable cause affidavit and the alibi statement is in the show notes. If you want to download them, we're going to discuss these at length this afternoon, and we're going to reference it to page numbers. So if you want to follow along, you can. I'm going to bring, without any further ado, we're going to bring in who you really came here to see. Frank Thornton. He came in a retired lieutenant from Vermont. He also worked at the crime lab, and he started his own digital forensics company, Blackthorn, which is in the show notes. It's also going to be in the chats, including Frank's Twitter page, so you can follow along with him as he goes along tweeting. Frank, thanks for coming back on again. It's been I think 2 months, but welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Joe. It's my pleasure to be back.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out about this, because this was some big news last week, right? So we finally get the alibi statement from Bryan Kohberger's defense team. Yep. And I'm a little surprised in regards to that it's basically just about the cell phone evidence. And that's why having you on today is great, because I am far from an expert in this. So thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome.
So if you're following along here, guys, we're going to be, like I said, we're going to be talking about the affidavit, which is 18 or 19 pages, and the alibi statement. You can get them and you can follow along. So we have a timeline in the affidavit there, right, Frank? And that's basically where you're looking at. What's your major focus? If you are, let's say, working for the defense or you're working for the prosecution, let's take the prosecution first. We're going to have you play devil's advocate. Okay. What is some of the main digital forensics here that you'd be looking at to help your case out?
Well, the main thing is basically starting on page 10 of the affidavit. They identify Mr. Kohberger's phone that had been picked up from a prior traffic stop, and the phone was noted on there. They had done checking for who owned the kind of car that was they suspected used in the crime. So they narrowed down cars. They get to Mr. Kohberger's name. He's got this ticket, and here's his phone number. So we're going to start checking the phone number from there. And what they did, and it's explained in the affidavit, they went out and they filed for a search warrant for the historical data surrounding that phone for that time and place of the homicides. And they then started looking to see if his data fit or didn't fit what was going on. It seemed to fit, and they went from there. Obviously, you can go through the whole affidavit as to how the whole thing progressed with the searches of the cars and locating him in Pennsylvania and so forth. But from a standpoint of someone that's doing the digital forensics, getting that phone number is kind of a key thing. If they hadn't gotten it through the traffic ticket, they would have had to do it somehow. Either checking records, which means usually searching providers, or they would have to perhaps even go and talk to them and say, what's your phone number?
Right. And because we have a specific timeline that they're fitting in, and the timeline works for you and against you, right? And depending on what side of the divide you're on, the prosecution or the defense. So just quickly, the occupants are home at 2 a.m. At 4 a.m., we get a DoorDash. At 4:12, we got a TikTok going on. And then we have 4:17, we get this distorted audio. Maybe it was a scream or a dog barking. And then we have the vehicle, right? So the vehicle arrives around 4:04. It leaves around 4:20, seen speeding away. And that's basically the timeline that the prosecution has zoned in on. And this is where the defense, of course, has to zone on. This is the time that the event happened, where you had the suspect and the victims crossing. So Correct. This becomes ground zero for the case here.
Right.
Now, for the defense, they put out an alibi, and they're basically just, listen, they're not just going after the cell phone records, but they haven't mentioned anything about DNA in the alibi statement. So what is the defense trying to tell us? That the FBI is totally wrong in regards to what they found?
Well, the defense is playing a very dangerous game here. They have to admit some of the data is correct, but they also are saying that a lot of it is either incorrect or it's being presented in the wrong way. And they are saying he has been going out at night, he's been doing stargazing, and he's been spending a lot of time on the road, and all the data that the prosecution is using that is showing the car in the area around the time or following the time of the homicides is that is actually something else. He was out stargazing, and it's got nothing to do with the crimes. So they're going to have to admit some of that data is correct. I mean, there's no way around that. And as far as how much they're going to be able to fight what the FBI's CAS team presents, it's going to be difficult. There's a lot of data that they're going to be coming up with. I've worked one case with a CAS data, and it's very, very thorough.
Can you explain to the audience what CAST is, what the FBI CAST is?
I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's the FBI team that goes through and they do cellular analysis, and they will look at things like whether tower data is accurate for the location, for instance, of the tower. They will then also do things like signal strength to indicate whether a phone actually could or could not hit a given tower at a given time and place. And they have all sorts of equipment. They go out, they look at the where the phone was physically at the time it was supposed to have been, whether it's actually able to connect through to a data or make a data connection or a cellular connection to a tower at the place that it says it was. So it's very hard to kind of refute that much detailed data when you go through it.
Right. And for those that are following along, if you want to follow along with the Cellular Analysis Survey team, it's on page 13 of the affidavit. And also on page 13, and we could put this to rest, Frank, right? A lot of people saying that the cell phone was turned off, that the police said the cell phone was turned off. Actually, in the PCA, it gives 3 reasons why there might not have been a connection, right?
Right.
And those 3 reasons are: it could be off, it could be airplane mode, or just not connecting to a cell tower, like it's out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, we could kind of put that to rest in regards to this. And I guess the main question that everyone asks is, because the cell phone's off, is it totally untraceable?
Well, assuming it doesn't connect to anything else via something like Wi-Fi, then it's pretty much untraceable. Essentially, when you put it in airplane mode or you turn it off physically, the phone, or if it's blocked, that's another possibility. If you put it in like a Faraday bag, the signal gets blocked. The system can't see the phone, and the phone can't see the system. And at that point, you can't trace it using things like cell tower data because it's not connecting to a cell tower.
And is the GPS something different? So if you have, let's say, Waze on or something like that, because I've seen my phone, right, when you get into a rural area and it says, connecting, but my Waze is still running.
Right. The GPS data is actually connected from GPS satellites, a completely different signal. You've got actually several different receivers within a cell phone, and the GPS being one of them. That data is actually receive only, and it comes in from satellites.
Right. So this is actually 2 different things. So when we're talking about them tracing a cell phone, it could be done through cell towers. It could be done through satellites too, right? With an app on the phone. You think that could be a possibility?
Yeah, they might have gotten some app data. It's hard to say. I mean, I've testified in cases before where app data was pulled directly from the phone. It's the defendant's own data. They've gone to locate something on a map, for instance, where they were meeting people, and that's their data on their phone. It's got nothing to do with the cellular system. So that's entirely possible. There may be other things, like I mentioned, Wi-Fi. That's certainly a possibility.
Sorry, the defense is arguing that they haven't gotten all of the discovery information either, right? That's a little concerning in regards to this. I mean, because if they're planning on their defense and they're going to start trial soon, I mean, they got to get this information. Totally.
Yeah, it's part of the way the system works. Discovery, the prosecution is supposed to hand over everything that is relevant to the case, especially if it's something they intend to uh, show uh, use during the trial. And it's also supposed to be available for the defense in case there's anything expulsory. Excuse me.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, you're supposed to hand over all that. Now, as well as I do, behind the scenes, there's always kind of this give and take going on. Sometimes the prosecution is just trying to get this whole mass of data, whether it's documents, whether it's cell phone records, whatever it happens to be, and pushing it out to the defense just becomes a whole management issue. So, that may be part of it. I don't know. And I've always seen defense attorneys, that when I'm working in a defense case, they're constantly saying, well, I'm not getting everything from the prosecution. So it always seems to be kind of one of those eternal battles that's going on behind the scenes in a court case.
Right. And you're actually dealing with, I think, at least three different agencies, right? You got the Moscow Police Department, you got the state police, the Idaho State Police, and the FBI, right? So there's different groups
Right.
here. And it seems as if the FBI's CAS team, the Cellular Analysis Survey team, is the one that conducted all of this cell phone technology, where they actually put out a nice map and they showed all the different things.
Right.
We will get to at least one major point about that map that I think the defense is going to have a really difficult time explaining. But let's talk about some of the other things that go on with this, because they mention the word ping, right? The ping of the cell phone. Can you explain to us what that ping is and how that happens?
A ping on a cell phone is basically the law enforcement agencies request that a signal be sent out to locate where the phone is at a given time. That's all it is. They usually have a contact number that they can get a hold of. In a case like this, a lot of times one person is assigned from the cellular company to deal with law enforcement. They become the liaison. And so if the police are looking at a particular suspect, they're looking, knowing that that suspect carries a given phone, they can call this person and say, can you send a ping? Let us know where this phone is. And it's used to figure out exactly where the phone is, because the cell tower sends out a signal. The phone says, I'm here, and they know where it's located. This is used a lot in like kidnapping cases where there's exigent circumstances. You got to locate a phone right away. They send a ping or series of pings and track a phone.
Now, this is pretty rural location, right? So there's probably fewer towers around, and it's just not like this. The phone he had was AT&T, so we know that.
Right.
But we don't know. I guess, would we be able to get information from, let's say, a Verizon tower if it's there, or even though it's not connected to that network, would that still be attached to it anyhow?
That data should be, if it's roaming at all, it should have been pulled back through the AT&T data. Probably from what I'm seeing of the map there, it looked like it was hitting only AT&T towers.
Which is interesting too, right? Because then you can say that this, not only is this phone an AT&T phone, but it's also connecting directly to the AT&T tower, right? That's why I wanted to ask that. How far does the tower have to be, or basically, I'm trying to say, like, it says it pings. Does that mean it's a pretty much a given that this location is 100% correct, or is it a far, like, wider kind of event?
Cell towers can be pretty far. I work in a rural area, and I've seen distances of connections up to 15 miles away. So you can have a pretty wide area of where a phone can be located. The towers itself usually narrow it down to some extent, in that they send out a kind of a fan pattern, if you will, from the tower, and the phone can be located anywhere within that fan pattern. It's usually 3 or 4 angles around the center of a tower where it's actually transmitting to. But it does give you some general location. The map, for instance, that they show in the affidavit, let me see what page that's on.
as you're looking for that. Bernie Heaven, thank you much for that super sticker. And Adam Malone, thank you too for your super. I really appreciate that, guys.
So on page 15, there's a map that they think they're proposing is part of the route that Kohberger's car took that night, based on the cellular data. Now, what that is actually they've drawn a line on a map based on the roads saying that, well, the phone was hitting these towers at certain times back from Moscow back to Pullman. And it is, if it's hitting these towers, it would have been probably on these roads. So you can't say it was definitively on the road at that time and place, but what you can say is this tower covers this area, and if he's going back, it's probably very likely that this is the route he would have taken. Right.
And this is what I guess the defense is going to be saying. This map here on page 15 is not accurate because they have him at Wawa. I'm sorry, I mispronounced that park, right? So Wawa, like the Pennsylvania Wawas, right? So right. Wawa, I know I'm going to get all kinds of grief about mispronouncing it, but I always tell people, if I mispronounce something in your town, I apologize, but come to Long Island and start, looking at some of these town names and then we'll talk. So is that basically what we're going to be dealing with here in this? It's going to be a battle of experts, basically, this is coming down to.
Yeah, and the defense is, I think, as I said, they're going to have to agree that some of this data is somewhat accurate. I mean, they can, maybe there's alternate roads through the mountains in there. I looked back several months ago at some of the main routes, and there's not really too many routes through the mountains. So if they're alleging he's out at that date and time looking at the stars, he's going to have very few roads that he could have otherwise been on and still hit those same towers.
Right, because there's very few towers around, right? So I mean, just basically That's it. Forrest Nelson, thank you again for those sub gifts. Thank you very much, and thank you, Rob McMullen, too, for the super sticker. So yeah, this is what we're tuning in on, right? I mean, what the defense is what their expert is going to say. Now, according to the alibi statement, their alibi statement is basically saying, in so many words, that the cast survey team here is not right. Our guy is somewhere else, and they have more evidence to prove it. What other evidence electronically in the digital could do? Because if they had evidence, right? So if I'm the defense, and I'm not a defense attorney, and I know neither are you, but if just me personally, if I had a photograph taken at that park at that time when the murders were, I would have said it in the alibi statement, right? Why let your guy sit in jail and and say, I mean, that's just me. And of course, I'm going to get hate for that one too. But the issue that comes down to, but that's the reality of it, right? I mean, if I had something other than, stay tuned, basically what we get.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to present any of this. It doesn't look like they have an absolute alibi, like he was in a bar that night and was there with 15 of his friends. I mean, something along those lines would certainly have gotten him pushed out, out of jail relatively quickly if it could be proven. Police sometimes make mistakes, so they get the wrong guy, and you start interviewing people and they say, well, he was with me. Okay, well, you get one or two, it may be a little suspect. You get 15 or 20, it becomes more concrete.
Right, and that's actually part of the alibi statement in regarding the Idaho law that they actually even talk about in here in Idaho Code 19-519. Not only do you have to put the alibi, but you also have to put in the eyewitness, and they didn't do that, right? So this is kind of an alibi-ish kind of thing because their expert is saying digitally as the witness, I guess, in this, they're saying that my guy's not there.
Right. Yeah, and all he's going to be presenting is more data, and I'm a little surprised to see that they really don't present anything concrete in the alibi statement, other than to say, well, we're going to offer this, and it may be part of the legal strategy. I don't know if Idaho law requires as an affirmative defense an alibi statement. I'm assuming that's probably what we're dealing with here.
Right. So Anna Banana asks a question, and it's a good one. Is there any way for a phone to randomly ping someplace and be totally inaccurate?
Well, it depends on what you mean by totally inaccurate. I mean, well, as I said, you're getting an aerial location for a where the phone may be or should be located within the signal area of the cell tower. That's not usually real accurate as to whether it's 5 feet of something like that. It's more like you're in a square mile area or several square mile area. So depends on what your accuracy level is.
Gotcha.
Something else like the GPS signal can be within 30 feet. That's very accurate.
Right. And actually, you can even see it on your car as you're driving along. Bold
Right.
and Dangerous, thank you very much for gifting those memberships. I really appreciate that. And Anina says, did his cell phone ever log into a Wi-Fi on the King Road house? That was something I believe the father said. Nothing. It's not in the PCA, so it doesn't come from the police. It's not part of the affidavit for him to establish probable cause, meaning the police to establish probable cause. That's basically, I think, what Goncalves, the father, had said in an interview. So that has caused some confusion also in regards to a lot of the different things that we're talking about. Right now, we're just going to concentrate on what we know, and that's the cell phone data. If you're just joining us now, we have almost 300 people in the room. So please remember to like and share as we're talking to retired Lieutenant Frank Thornton, digital forensics expert, and we're just breaking down the PCA, the affidavits for the arrest, probable cause arrest file, and the alibi statement. And there is a link in the show notes to these affidavits so you could follow page by page. Frank, they talk about, not so much in the PCA, but they've been talking about this in a lot of different things, metadata, right? So
Yep.
Could you tell us actually, it's a pretty easy definition, but can you tell us what metadata is and how that could play a role in this investigation with the cell phones?
Well, metadata is data about data. That's the simple explanation. Usually it's things like it comes into play, for instance, a lot of times in photographic data on cell phones. You get things like a date and time stamp. That's metadata. You get things like what kind of phone took the picture and the built-in camera parameters, such as the focal length. It may be set. You also get GPS information, for instance, in as part of the metadata in photographs, if the GPS is turned on. So it's kind of, like I said, it's data about data. It's usually embedded somehow in some of the files, and you can use it in a variety of different ways depending upon what you're trying to present in court.
Now, so is that basically for then the metadata for the photos and the videos that the defense is saying that he has on his phone in regards to his whereabouts about these days leading up to it?
Well, I would assume so. It's hard to tell because, as we've said, the alibi statement is rather sparse in detail. But if they have something that says, yes, he's been up on this particular mountain looking at stars and he took this photograph and so forth, that's all fine and dandy, but it still is going to, leave a question of where was he at the time that the crime occurred. And
Gotcha.
That's, unless you've got something that shows he was 50 miles away at that exact time and place, and within that time frame we talked about, in those 20 minutes from 4 o'clock to 4:20, it's going to be hard to refute anything.
Now, CHS a question says, Frank, how would a defense team present data from the suspect's phone if they don't have his phone?
Well, good question. That comes down to the prosecution providing them with what is known as a dump of the phone. Usually they're going to use a program like Celebrite to extract the data. That's something that they would have been looking at. And as part of the discovery process, they have to give at least some of that data to the defense team to look over. And the defense team is going to, in turn it over that to their expert. Now, whether they've gotten the full dump or they've gotten a partial dump, I don't know. Usually, they will get at least the reports that the prosecution is generating off of that phone dump to look at. Whether they want to look at the whole phone or not is usually up to the defense.
So Adam Malone, thank you. Says the last paragraph, Ann, that's the attorney, Ann Taylor. I always get confused with the lady who does the close. Ann Taylor wrote us was ridiculous. Give us information that may or may not exist on our expert will say you're lying. Isn't that essentially what it says? And basically, yeah, it's basically going to refute exactly everything that the prosecution team, the cast team has said. Is that basically what you get out of that gist too?
Yeah, I mean they're looking for anything and everything that they can possibly use, which that's what a good defense attorney does. And you're hoping that you get a good defense attorney who wants to look at everything. But if the prosecution doesn't have a piece of information, they obviously can't turn it over.
Right. And that's actually if you're looking at the alibi, it's on page 2. And it also says what we were talking about before, that they basically haven't gotten all the discovery yet to do this. I'm thinking that maybe, I'll ask a lawyer this question when I find one, but I guess maybe the discovery was being a little delayed because they were waiting to see what they were going to come out with their alibi statement. I think that's basically what it was going to come out to.
And as you said, they've got the Moscow PD, they've got the Idaho State Police, they've got the FBI. You're pulling in a huge amount of documents and other information from all these different agencies. You're trying to collate all this stuff. You're trying to get it in some manner that you can turn over to the defense. It's a long process. So they could be waiting on, say, an expert report out of the FBI cast team or something else that they haven't been able to turn over yet because they don't have it. It's hard to say what exactly is missing or isn't missing.
And I think I missed it in the comments to pull it up, but if they're looking for where I was talking about the security camera and the noise was on page 4 of the PCA affidavit at 417. It says a security camera located, I guess it's across the street. And that's where that located. If you're following along, that was on page 4. So, I mean, and for former investigators like ourselves, right? So when we look at the time frame of this event, we know that there's a long delay, right? Where the cops actually come to the crime scene. And they're dealing with certain like that. And the postmortem interval is going to play a big role in this, in that part of it too, with the latent shoe prints and all the other stuff. But
right.
The cell phone data, they keep on tracking it, which I think is actually pretty amazing, right? So they not only did they just didn't stop it and say, okay, we're not getting any more. They went on for a good, couple of days, it looks like, in regards to this phone.
Right.
So let's start breaking down that a little bit. So if we look on, if you're following along in the affidavit, and if you can just switch to page 8, right? So they have at approximately 5:25 a white sedan that's going through that, and approximately 5:27 the white Elantra. And they kind of if you match that up with the map, it looks, which is on the next page, it kind of shows you exactly what they're dealing with here and how this cell phone data is kind of tracking this. And like I said, I find it interesting to see how their defense team, including Cy Ray, and how he's going to, because this guy's a pretty intelligent guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's got himself, he sold the company to LexisNexis. He's got lots of cases under his belt. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's been a fantastic witness for the prosecution. I think this might be his first defense witness, and he's got a lot to lose as far as I'm concerned in regards to that. So he's kind of risking a lot too, which is kind of interesting because it shows a level of confidence that I think he has in regards to this. But, I know they're not going into this case, the prosecution, just with the description of a guy with bushy eyebrows is the reason why we arrested this guy, right? I mean, enough with that too, right? I mean,
yeah, certainly for the probable cause to get to that point for the arrest, they certainly have a lot of information that adds up to Kohberger being the right guy. He's driving the right kind of car. It's got the missing plate. His phone was roughly in the area following it and goes back to Washington. So there's a lot of stuff that all fits together. As an investigator, you're going to be saying to yourself, yeah, this is the guy we want to be looking at. So certainly I can't fault any of that stuff there. Now, what the defense is going to come up with on the other hand, is really questionable at this point, because if they had something that disproved any of this really clearly, I think they would have already been presenting it.
Right, because your guy's rotting in jail.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, that's the way I look at it. At least they could get him out maybe and say, get him out on bail, drop the bail to hold him off until trial starts if you had something really concrete.
Right.
That, and if I'm the guy sitting in jail and I'm like, if you have something, you better get me out of here. I mean, that's basically what I'd be screaming from the top of my lungs, for crying out loud.
Yeah. I know there were cases, I've heard of this before, that it comes down to a case of whether you can afford the bail or you can afford an attorney, and you go with affording the attorney and you sit in jail. But you're right. If I had something, I'm a defendant sitting in jail, and I've got some information that says I wasn't the guy, I'm going to be screaming for my attorney to get out there and get that out, both publicly and into the court system, so that they can bounce me. I don't want to be sitting in jail.
Right. I mean, that's the bottom line. On page 11 of the affidavit, they talk about, because this always comes up in conversation. So Bernie Heaven, thank you very much for the integrity and the facts. It matters. Thank you. Thank you, Bernie. We appreciate that. We're trying to see both ends of the spectrum here. It's, we're putting ourselves in the position of the prosecution, and we're putting ourselves in the defense. And, everybody's innocent until proven guilty. And we're just kind of looking at the hardcore facts that we got right out of the PCA and the Alibi, because this is what we have to deal with, and so does everybody else, right? So anything else you hear outside of this is basically, beyond speculation at that point. But a lot of people give credence to Bryan Kohberger. He has the undergraduate degree in psychology and cloud-based forensics.
Mm-hmm.
And it listed it right in there. What is the cloud-based forensics all about?
Basically, it's forensics for servers, and it's cloud-based servers such as Amazon or Microsoft Azure. Google, for instance. All three of those big providers have cloud services that you can hire a server, or hire even basically down to a single PC in a rack someplace in a serving center for your storage needs or for computational needs. And so his degree, or the degree he was working on, was part of getting in and analyzing data from those kinds of sources. We all utilize cloud services for our phones, for instance, storing photos and other backup data. It gets backed up to the cloud. It's on the cloud server someplace.
Right. Now, I'm assuming that they've gotten all kinds of cloud information on this case too, right? Because there's a lot of data that can be stored from your phone into the cloud, correct?
Correct.
What kind of data gets stored from your phone to the cloud?
Usually it's things like settings on the phone, so you can keep that stuff when you change to a new phone. It's things that you want to hang on to, like photographs, videos, some documents. I've got cloud storage where I keep basically all those things for not only my phone, but my PC does the same thing. It all backs up to the cloud, and I can keep it and grab it for any place in the world as long as I can get online.
The reason why I was asking you that question, because my follow-up is going to be based on what the PCA gives us about the three different ways that this phone could have not connected. And that's on page 13. It said, turns it off, airplane mode, or
Right.
it's just not connecting. Does any of that information get recorded anywhere? So if I turn my phone off to reset it, is there a record somewhere in the phone that could tell me, or tell the user who knows exactly what they're looking for? Oh, at what time is it now? At 13:34 hours, Joe turned off his phone. Does that get recorded anywhere?
Yes, it does. It's within the phone itself. Depends on the actual type of phone as to the amount of detail. But it basically says there are power events. They happen at these times. It was powered off. It was powered on. And yeah, that's going to be a something of interest, certainly to the prosecution, because they're maintaining the phone was disconnected from the network during that time period. Those three reasons. If it was deliberately turned off, those power events will be of enormous interest to the prosecution to say, well, it was powered down at this time and it wasn't powered back on until another time, whatever that follow-up time was. If you look at page, I think 13 it is, there's information where the phone was not turned off. It was disconnected from the network. It wasn't available. And that goes from 247 to 448. And you got this 2-hour, 1-minute gap there that is got to be explained somehow. It could have been turned off. And if so, those power events will be of interest. It could have been not connecting because it was somehow blocked. I mentioned Faraday bags earlier. Those are bags you can put a cell phone into. It blocks the signal. That blocks out basically everything. The GPS, the cellular, Wi-Fi, blocks it all. It for whatever reason, it could have been out of touch with the cellular network also because it wasn't hitting a tower. If you're out in a rural area, there's no tower that you're connecting to, the phone's not going to show up, but it won't show power events in that case.
Right, which is actually interesting because, to me, if I'm writing this probable cause affidavit, I thought maybe I'd have that information and say, as per the device, right, this phone was turned off. They're not saying that because at this point, I don't think they even know what they had at this time.
Yeah, I mean, this is within a month of the crime. So, if they hadn't seized the phone at that point, hadn't gotten a full extraction and a full analysis, it's unlikely they would have looked at something like the power events. And as an investigator, you're going to stick to what is going into the affidavit. You're not going to say, well, we think he turned it off when you don't know that. You're just going to say it wasn't connected.
Right. And that's why we keep on hammering this home, because so many people are saying he turned the phone off. He did not turn the phone off. Even it says on the PCA, we don't know. They give you 3 reasons. Is it just like the cell phone, just like powering off, does airplane mode trigger an event in the somewhere in the records?
It depends on the phone. Some of them do, some of them don't. And I'm not sure what he's got for a phone. So
yeah, I don't know if he's got an iPhone or a Samsung or what have you, but and that could tell us in there. So Bonnie asked a question, says, info is not shared. Can it come up in trial? I'm assuming you're referring to everything that the prosecution has, they have to hand over to the defense. Right. That's about discovery. That's about Brady material. Maryland versus Brady. It's an important aspect because if that has to include exculpatory and inculpatory evidence. So Bonnie, if the prosecution has information and doesn't hand it over, boy, they're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Big trouble. So I hope that answers your question. And if not, Bonnie, just follow it up and we'll try to get it in there. Sarcasm for Fun. Thank you. Just donated 10 memberships to the channel. Thank you very much. That is super generous of you. Thank you very much. So, Frank, you have a lot of tags, just like I do on your affidavit. Is there something that you want to specifically discuss that I haven't asked just yet?
No, I think we've gotten most of them in, Joe.
Okay.
I did have all these different tags.
I went old school.
But the big thing I said I think the defense is going to have a hard time with is they've got to explain something satisfactory to the jury as to why that gap exists. Now, if they can do it, fine and dandy. Good luck to them. But that is awful circumstantial stuff that just says, why is the phone not functioning in that time period?
And there's actually another time where the phone goes off too. Later on in that day, it goes off for like 2.5 hours or 3 hours.
Right.
But here's a caveat, right? And I know you picked up on it. If anybody's following it on page 17, if you're looking at this, I think the defense is going to have a real hard time explaining that all the stuff that the feds have found is nonsense because our guy is in a park by this river. I think it's the Snake something river, whatever it might be. You guys can yell at me later in the comments if I got it wrong. But here's the problem. At 12:46 p.m. on the days of the killings that happened, he is in Clarkston, Washington, and he's at Albertson. they have him on surveillance video. So the cell phone data gives them an exact location, just like it has on other things. And not only does it say he's in Clarkston, but they have video of him. They see his car pass a coffee shop, I think it is. And then he goes into an Albertson, and they have him on video shopping for about 15 minutes and then leaving at 1:04. So there is a real issue, I feel. So if I'm the defense, how do I tackle that, right? If all the other stuff I say is nonsense. However, the one time you get him in Washington and he's on video, that's 100% accurate. I mean, they get no choice but to say that.
Right. Yeah. And that's why I think the defense is playing a tricky game here, because they have to admit that some of this data is correct. And then, as I said, a jury is going to kind of assume, you think at least, that if some of the data is correct, why isn't all of the data correct?
Right. Specifically that one, because they got video surveillance. You can't make that one go away.
Right.
I mean, you might argue that the timestamp might be off, right? Because we know that sometimes, you and I know that, right? You get a video camera and they have the time is wrong, right, and the date might be wrong. That could be an issue. But when I read it, I don't know if you guys can see it, but I started in there, and when I first read it, I said pretty accurate here with 2 exclamation points. So it's a little different. So in America, says, explain this, Bryan Kohberger. You are wearing latex gloves and separating your personal trash from the family's kitchen garbage, placing your own trash into several sealable plastic baggies and then into your neighbors. Yeah, that's a whole other issue, right? That's the other search warrant that's actually in this whole thing. There's a lot of other details, of course, the DNA on the knife sheath and all these other things that the prosecution has, that the defense has to do. And because of the gag order, is there possibility, do you feel, that there is other digital or forensic evidence in regards to these phones, Frank?
Oh, at this point, absolutely. The prosecution can't comment and can't say we're going to present this stuff now because of that gag order. And prosecutions usually don't go into a lot of detail ahead of time anyways, because you don't want to overly influence people. So you don't present a lot of detail. So I would say, yes, they have got an enormous amount of data at this point. I don't know, for instance, what kind of data is available on Elantras, because I haven't looked into those particularly, but I'm sure that they've looked at everything in the Elantra that is digital. A lot of cars nowadays have got trip information that's built in, and they're going to be looking at that in comparison to other information. Certainly, you've got all these things like the search warrants for the stuff out in Pennsylvania. There's just an enormous amount of stuff that's going to be building up behind the scenes, and the prosecution is going to have huge 3-ring binders full of all this stuff they're going to be presenting in court.
Yep. Well, I know you mentioned it, but I actually looked it up. Now, it depends on the model, but the 2015 Hyundai Elantra did indeed come with GPS, but only as the upgraded infotainment package, right? So it had to be an upgrade package.
Right.
This package added a 7-inch touchscreen to the center dash. Now, I know we have video. We have the body cam of the police officer in the car. So this is something. Yep. If somebody is online now, just go and Google it, because I can't do that at the moment. And which includes Bluetooth functionality as well as navigation and GPS capabilities, which is kind of an interesting little tidbit there.
Yeah, and that's a whole area that I think we mentioned this the last time I was on with you, Joe, that there's a whole area of car forensics that's coming up that is electronic and digital in nature. And that's a good example right there. If that car has that information built into it, if he's got the right model, then it's even more information that's going to be coming up. I'm sure they would have gotten a separate search warrant just for the electronic data within the car's infotainment system.
Right. And I'm not saying that he did, right? I'm just saying this is what you can find out if this car has it. I don't know if he's got the infotainment package, but it's brought up in the respect that the car has its own computers in it.
Right.
Is there any other digital parts that you know of? I know this might not be your area per se, but is there anything else that in a car that can, if this infotainment package isn't there, is there still anything else in the car that can tell whereabouts? Do you know of?
There's some, but usually it's pretty limited. Most cars have got a black box nowadays. I think it's from basically 96 on. They've got some basic rudimentary black box information, but usually that's for crash data and only records the last few minutes of a car before it resets. It's a kind of a rolling data, and when you get in an accident, it basically locks that data in at that point. But various cars have got various computers in them. So if he's got something else in there too that may be exclusive only to that particular model, it may be of value to the prosecution. Maybe of value to the defense.
As I said, the defense too, right? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the defense, because they could say it's something that could corroborate their information that at the time the car data is showing it's over here at the park and actually not near in Moscow, which would be really interesting. So this car can play several roles, right? About if it has this information that you can access and it can help the defense and the prosecution. And also, of course, the forensics, right? I mean, we could talk about that all day in regards to that. But there's something else. I mean, we don't know the type of phone he has, but if he has Samsung or even the iPhone, they have those Find My Phone things on it.
Right.
And apparently you can still connect to your phone with this app, even if the phone's turned off. Is that true?
No, at least not my experience. If the phone's turned off, you get kind of a last location of where it was. It was last seen at. For instance, I had a call with my wife the other day, and she doesn't like answering the phone in the car. So I looked at where she was. She was driving. I waited a few minutes until she was out of the car. But I noticed when you call up those apps, it will say this was last seen at until it updates. So if it's off, that doesn't get recorded at all.
Okay, because that was just a something that I had found somebody had written somewhere, but the Find My iPhone, can it be turned on? If it's turned off, right? What about airplane mode? Would that be able to? Because it's still on technically, the phone. Would you be able to use it with the airplane mode on?
If the airplane mode is on, you can still usually use some things like the Bluetooth. And going back to the car, you mentioned that package might have a Bluetooth connection, for instance. So the phone might be in airplane mode, where it's not connecting the cellular network, but it may still have been connecting to the car network via Bluetooth. Same thing with Wi-Fi, that can stay on. So if you turn off the cellular connection, you still can use Wi-Fi if you turn that portion on. Depends again on the particular phone and how the options are set up. But I was flying last week. I had it in airplane mode while I was on the plane, but I was using both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi at that time.
Now, even if it doesn't have this infotainment thing specifically with the screen and everything, if it has a USB port and you could plug your phone in to charge it or use one of these mapping things,
right?
Does any of that data get recorded anywhere on the?
Again, yeah, it depends on the capability of the car. So some of them it's just basically a charging connection. Some of them will in fact do some basic logging, like the phone was plugged in at such and such a time, and it's it gives the name of the phone, that type of stuff.
Right, yeah, because when I plug my phone in, it still says iPhone 5 when I plug my phone in, right? But but I have the thing where the Apple CarPlay,
right?
So I know that it's everything that you do on there is recorded. I mean, it's got the entire world on there, including your cell phone, your text messages, everything under the sun, including the scores of my Mets that keep on losing, but amongst other heartaches, right? But the other issue that comes down to is this is, I guess I'm assuming, and you tell me if I'm wrong, the defense is going to lead in with this as their main argument right off the bat and forget about the DNA and the car being at the scene or in around the scene, or the car that looks like it, right? We don't know if it's his or not. They're still going to have a difficult time with the white car, no front plate like Pennsylvania cars, but that's something, it's still circumstantial, right? We know that.
Sure.
But, could there be another white car in the area with no front plate? Of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, we're not gonna say anything stupid in regards to that. But do you think that the initial argument is going to be just the cell phone data thing and bringing in the Syray and just kind of kill the case that way?
It would certainly seem so at this point. I mean, that's the only information that they've offered as any kind of alibi. Now, whether they've got other stuff up their sleeve that they're still planning on pulling out as we get closer to trial, excuse me, hard to say. But so far, the only thing they're offering for any kind of defense really is any kind of affirmative defense, certainly, is the fact that they are presenting what they feel is contrary to the cellular data that the prosecution has.
And that's caveat that comes with some pitfalls, like we were talking about before. It comes up with some major pitfalls, but it also could come down to the fact that if they can prove otherwise, does this entire case fall apart? I mean, it's going to there's other things that I don't like about the crime scene and how things were handled. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, people think that I'm pro law enforcement on this case. Like, you haven't been listening to me, because I've been far from pro law enforcement in this case in regards to how things were handled, specifically with the crime scene. This is a whole other area for me that I don't get involved with because I don't know it. That's why we bring in experts like Frank Thornton to come in and break this down. I mean, right now, if you're just catching us the last few minutes, we're over almost 420 people are watching this live. So thank you very much. Just remember, please, to like and subscribe if you can. I just passed 9,000 subscribers, and it's kind of exciting how fast this thing has grown. But when we're getting into this digital forensics area, there's lots of cases that we're seeing now that cell phone records, internet records, and video surveillance, which I call the three forensic horsemen, are dictating exactly how these investigations are going.
Yes.
This one, I think, is going to be one to watch, right? To see how this one breaks down in regards to the fight between the experts.
Yeah, and presumably the prosecution will be marching in people from the FBI's CAS team, whether they've got someone from the Idaho State Police, anybody that was involved in Moscow PD who collected the information. All of those people are going to be going up, and the defense basically has to either discount that information or prove it wrong in some way. Exactly,
yeah. And on page 13, when they talk about the FBI cast members or cast member, he's got over 15 years of federal law enforcement experience, which includes 6 years with the FBI. From information provided with CAS, the cop who wrote the affidavit was able to determine the estimated locations for the phone number on November 12th through November 13th in that time period. So this individual, it seems as if they're naming at least one person, but they refer to members of CAS, like you said, so it's plural, written in the affidavit. So we're going to see more than one FBI CAS member being brought in there. I guess, does everybody have maybe a different level of expertise in regards to certain aspects of digital forensics? Is that basically what might be seen in this team?
Oh yeah, digital forensics, when I started off, was basically just computers. It was, your desktop computer, and there wasn't much else to it. And in the last 20 years, it shifted enormously. I mean, you've got cars, you've got cell phones, you've got tablets, and a lot of people have got expertise in a lot of different subspecialties now. So they could bring in someone that is going to talk about exclusively GPS stuff tracked through the cell data pertaining to just where the car was, for instance, or maybe they'll talk about just where the phone was. I mean, they've got all sorts of experts. Certainly the FBI, they've got just loads of experts that can come in and talk about the minutia on this stuff and present it clearly to a jury, and the defense is going to be fighting all that.
What other kinds of so we're going to have an expert, like you said, to tell us about the cell phone data and how that works, right? Is there another specific expertise that's going to come in, do you think, in order to try to explain? Because the defense is going to attack this, right? So if you were working for the prosecution right now and you know what's coming, mm-hmm. what would be your kind of to prepare for that?
One of the things I think I'd be looking at strongly is I'd be wanting an expert in radio frequency stuff who deals with the real back end of how the phones connect to the data and to the towers. because that is going to be crucial against the arguments that the defense is going to be presenting. That they talk about a little bit of radio frequency stuff, and that's obviously they're hinging something there. So if I was on the prosecution team, I'd be looking at who's your best guy with radio frequency information and showing signal strength and those types of things having to do with the phone. And that's the guy you want to get, at least hold on to as far as a rebuttal witness on any of the stuff that the defense presents.
What are some of those things? So this radio frequency person, what is that kind of thing?
Well, he can, someone like that, I say he, could be she. They're going to get up there and talk about when a signal is transmitted to and from the tower, because the phone's transmitting at times and the tower's transmitting, and where those signals will reach off a given tower at a given time. And all of that can change slightly depending upon things like weather conditions, foliage, for instance. There's a lot of different stuff that affects how those things are influencing whether a phone is connecting to a given tower at a given time date. So all of that stuff would be something that both the defense and the prosecution are going to be looking at. And it may come down to a real, argument of at that date and time whether a phone could not connect to a different tower.
Exactly right. So this is what's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, because I think we've seen the line drawn in the sand here is going to come down to the electronic evidence and the digital evidence that goes on with this, between specifically the cell phone. I mean, this is it, because the prosecutors are saying he's here, the defense is saying he's over here. Now it comes down to who can prove their point in regards to this. It's going to be interesting to see how this goes on.
It will be.
Like I said, this is going to be for textbooks. I mean, this might even be a case for the Supreme Court eventually someday, because of all the other factors that are involved in this, right? The forensics, the investigative genealogy, all the other things that we're not talking about today because we're just talking about digital forensics. I know a lot of people in the chat are saying, what about this? What about that? We're just focusing on the digital evidence here in regards to what we're dealing with in this. So this hour flew by. I can't believe that it just went by that quick. Is there anything that I failed to ask you or to input, something that you might have had in the notes?
No, I think we've covered it all, Joe. It's as you said, it's going to come down to a real fight on a lot of this stuff, but who's going to be the one that gets through to the jury is always a question, no matter what the trial is.
Yep, and we will leave it at that. Frank, thank you very much for breaking that down. It was like a master class on digital evidence, and in regards to that, so we really appreciate that. For those of you at 2 o'clock, you have Gizella True Crime has got a show going on, and at 3 o'clock, you got The Shaming of Jay. So you got some interesting shows. Hang on. So, Frank, you hang on one second. Everybody else, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you very much for watching. And please remember to like and share and tip your waitresses when you're walking out. All right, guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.